Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is James Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 7 waiver wire targets for the 2024 fantasy football season. Now, with all the injuries that took place in Week 6 to players such as Travis Etienne, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., Dallas Goedert, Quentin Johnston, Jaden Reed, Jordan Mason, Jerome Ford, Tyjae Spears, and Dontavion Wicks. Yes, I have to look over at the list because there are so many names. Again, a lot of injuries continuing to pile up every single week. Because of all those injuries and another two teams on bye going into Week 7, the Dallas Cowboys and Chicago Bears, many of us have to look towards the waiver wire in order to bolster our lineup and give ourselves a better chance to potentially win. So over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the best available running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, kickers, and defenses going into Week 7 that are not only going to help you hopefully this week, but for the remainder of the 2024 season in order to help you capture a championship. Now, before we get into today's episode, again, a reminder, if you guys are looking for my thoughts on a specific player, there are timestamps down in the description. While you're down there, be sure to, of course, subscribe. We're making daily fantasy content and, of course, live streaming every single day. We have just recently surpassed 90,000 subscribers, so I cannot thank you guys enough for all the support as we are on our journey to 100K. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin with talking about JUJU Smith-Schuster, the first wide receiver of today's video. So here's the fact of the matter. At this current moment in time, via Yahoo Fantasy, JUJU Smith-Schuster is only rostered in 32% of leagues. That number needs to increase by a significant margin, especially considering the contributions that he may have for the remainder of the season if, in fact, the Kansas City Chiefs do not address their wide receiver position by bringing in any other competition. As of the last performance, JUJU Smith-Schuster against the New Orleans Saints, 8 targets, 7 receptions, 130 receiving yards, and 16.5 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Almost scored a touchdown that led to an interception by that defensive lineman who is a former running back. One of the best interceptions that we have seen thus far this season. But nonetheless, the opportunities are going to be there for JUJU Smith-Schuster in the absence of Rashee Rice and Marquise Hollywood Brown. And as we continue with all the injuries that have taken place within this offense, besides Travis Kelce, they definitely need another man to step up within the receiving game, which JUJU did last time out. Now, if we go ahead and travel back to the 2022 season, when JUJU was a member of the Kansas City Chiefs prior to him, of course, joining the New England Patriots last year, the last time that we had saw JUJU within this offense, when he was given ample opportunity, was highly valuable for fantasy purposes. So when we talk about the overall 16 games that he played with the organization back in 2022, in the 9 games in which he was given 5 or more targets, in those 9 games was averaging 16.38 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. In 7 of those 9 games was able to surpass over double-digit fantasy points. Now, if we talk about the games in which he wasn't given much opportunity, less than 5 targets, he had 7 of those games and was averaging 5.41 fantasy points per game. And not a single time in those overall games did he surpass 7 fantasy points. So if, in fact, we're going to be in a situation where JUJU Smith-Schuster is going to be the clear and away number 1 outside of Travis Kelce within the receiving game. Of course, Xavier Worthy hasn't been a huge target fiend within this offense. If JUJU Smith is going to be that guy right outside of Travis Kelce, we're anticipating a lot of targets in his direction, and with those opportunities, he's going to be able to deliver as he has done thus far this season and the last time he was with the Kansas City Chiefs. So, again, if he's available, be sure to pick him up. Now, before we continue on with the rest of these wide receivers, as we'll talk about them individually, as I'll share with you guys those statistics, again, a reminder, at the end of today's episode, I'll be putting together a couple pick'em entries via Underdog. Again, if you guys haven't checked them out, at this current moment in time, if you sign up today using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, but you're going to get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season, weeks 7 through 18. These are Sunday morning rankings sent from my email directly to yours, which include by position, by tier, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, and flex. Half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings in order to help you set your lineups and capture championships and victories over the course of this season. So for those of you who are wondering if you're eligible to be able to take advantage of the overall opportunity, and of course put together a couple pick'em entries for tonight's game, be sure to check out the map to the right side of the screen. If in fact you are not eligible, you can find my rankings via Patreon, link also down in the description there. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, continuing on with the wide receiver conversation. We have Romeo Doubs. Again, this is a player that is currently rostered in only 35% of Yahoo leagues. I'm not going to suggest players that are already rostered over 40% of leagues, 50+% of leagues, because again, we would have already mentioned those players over the course of this entire season from weeks 1 through 6. But a player like Romeo Doubs, who is coming off of a week in which, of course, he left the team and was absent within the overall game, was suspended because of his absence from practice because he wasn't satisfied with the role that he had within that offense. Now that he's going ahead and scoring touchdowns, hopefully he's going to be satisfied with the offense and can continue to play for the Green Bay Packers. Again, coming off a performance in which he ran the most overall routes and played the most overall snaps amongst all wide receivers against the Arizona Cardinals, had 3 receptions for 49 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns in a great game in which, of course, Jordan Love had 4 passing touchdowns. But obviously, due to the injuries that Dontavion Wicks and Jordan Reed both sustained, it is certainly going to open up more opportunity for Romeo Doubs to continue to be a key factor within this offense. Christian Watson obviously scored himself a touchdown as well, and so did Jaden Reed. But as we continue, if there are going to be injuries within this receiving core, of course, Christian Watson finds himself injured far too often, and if those other wide receivers aren't going to miss potential time or going to be limited to any sort of capacity, Romeo Doubs taking on the Houston Texans in a potential shootout this upcoming weekend could be an exciting one. Now, speaking of the Houston Texans matchup this most recent week was taking on the New England Patriots, and the New England Patriots had their new rookie starting quarterback, Drake May, out there, who played relatively well in terms of fantasy purposes. 3 passing touchdowns, which was a huge surprise for many of us, and Demario Douglas was the mainstay kind of, I guess, benefactor of that within the offense. Now, as we continue to progress, we're going to see more and more opportunities go to, various different wide receivers or receiving options within this offense. But Demario Douglas thus far this season has been the most targeted receiving option of the New England Patriots, and that stayed the same with the change at quarterback, going from Jacoby Brissett to now Drake May. Now, in 3 of the last 4 games that we have seen the New England Patriots play, Demario Douglas in 3 of those 4 games has gotten himself 9 or more targets. Those performances looking like 9 targets, 7 receptions, 69 yards, and 11.3 fantasy points against the Jets defense. Against Miami, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 59 for 8.9 half PPR fantasy points. And then most recently against Houston, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 92 receiving yards, and a touchdown for 18.2 fantasy points. Considering this team is going to be in negative game scripts for the entirety of the season, the expectation is that Demario Douglas, only rostered in 7% of leagues, should be of value going forward. Again, we talked about him a lot last season as a potential starter option. Obviously didn't have himself a lot of opportunity last year, but in a full PPR format, even in the absence of scoring touchdowns, very valuable going forward for the remainder of the season with the quarterback change. Moving on to Xavier Legette. Look, Xavier Legette is still the number 2 receiving option of this offense. Over the course of the last 3 games, he has scored 2 touchdowns, and as long as he's continuing to be a mainstay factor within that red zone, he is going to be valuable. And of course, his overall target share and target count wasn't great this last week, but again, as long as he continues to work, a rookie wide receiver drafted in the first round, the data suggests that he's going to be in that top 40 conversation by the end of the season. So as long as those opportunities continue to go in his direction, going into week 7, taking on the Washington Commanders secondary, that is one of the top tier matchups that you can ask for at the wide receiver position. Both Deontay Johnson and Xavier Legette should be implicated for a top 40 performance within the upcoming week. Again, a player that is only rostered in 19% of leagues does have the threat of Adam Thielen returning in the upcoming weeks, but until then, certainly of value for many of our fantasy teams. Moving on to Michael Wilson. I think Michael Wilson can be argued to be a little bit higher within the overall, potential waiver wire pickup rankings, considering, again, 3 of the last 4 weeks in which he has participated in, he's got himself over 9 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Due to the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. is now in the concussion protocol, there is a possibility in which we could see Michael Wilson continue to reign as the number 1 target getter within this offense amongst the wide receivers. Of course, we know that Trey McBride is going to be that favorite target for Kyler Murray, as he has been over the course of the last 2 seasons. But going forward, within the upcoming matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers, again, their number 1 cornerback, Asante Samuel Jr., was sent to the injured reserve last week. If there's a possibility in which there is no Marvin Harrison Jr. in a negative game script, there's a possibility where Michael Wilson could certainly be of value, only rostered in 16% of Yahoo leagues. The final wide receiver within the top 6, which will continue, of course, to 7 through 12, is Quentin Johnston. He obviously was dealing with a little bit of an injury during that game, was limping around early on, and obviously didn't play himself a lot of overall snaps. But if we can get him to a healthy position, taking on the Arizona Cardinals this week could be a matchup that we certainly want to play him. Obviously, we just saw, Jordan Love completely dominate that team regardless of the weather. Of course, 4 passing touchdowns to, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson. So if Justin Herbert, who played incredibly well against that Denver Broncos secondary that gave everybody problems except for Justin Herbert. If, in fact, we can get into a situation in which he can go into Arizona and light up that defense, it wouldn't be as surprising. Quentin Johnston, Latimer McConkey, both of them dealing with injuries themselves, would be the primary number 1 and 2 within those overall efforts. Now let's move on to the number 7 through 12 overall wide receivers. We move on to Rashod Bateman at number 7. It's pretty quick and easy. 3 of the last 4 games have sustained 9 or more fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. In a full PPR, that's double-digit fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games, which again provides him a top potential 45 option every single time out. They take on the Buccaneers this week, which isn't a great secondary, and of course the Baltimore Ravens are dominating every single week since, of course, they have been on this winning streak. Then we move on to Darius Slayton. Again, another one of these weeks in which, in the absence of Malik Nabers, he had himself a lot of opportunity, double-digit targets, won Andrew a lot of money via underdog entries, but if it wasn't wasn't for that penalty, very easily should have had himself over 100 receiving yards within the game against the Cincinnati Bengals. Nonetheless, even if Malik Neighbors is to return, I would anticipate that Darius Slayton has done enough within this offense to dictate that he's going to get himself more opportunities than just one reception per game like he was prior to the overall injury and concussion protocol of Malik Neighbors. He could still be a value within this offense that continues to throw the ball at a high rate. Then we move on to Jordan Whittington and TUTU Atwell. Now, these are contingency potential pickups if, in fact, Cooper Kupp does not play this week. We know that Cooper Kupp is still dealing with that overall injury. We know that Puka Nacua is still on the injured reserve and not practicing. So if Jordan Whittington and TUTU Atwell are available and you are in need of a wide receiver this week, they take on the Las Vegas Raiders. We know that Matthew Stafford and the leftovers, meaning Whittington and TUTU Atwell, are going to find themselves success. We have seen it as of late. In fact, the last back-to-back games, Jordan Whittington in both games, 6+ receptions, 60+ receiving yards, and has found himself an abundance of overall success for fantasy. Same thing with TUTU Atwell. In each of the last 3 games, over 9.5 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. So in the absence of those 2 receivers, certainly potential 1 to 2 week pickup in place, as long as Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua potentially out. And even if Cooper Kupp returns this week, it's not to say that Jordan Whittington and TUTU Atwell can't find themselves success within the matchup, considering how advantageous it is within the week. Then we move on to VELE, who in week 1 found himself a lot of success with 8 receptions, 8 targets. Most recently, came back because of Josh Reynolds being placed on the injured reserve and ran the second most routes within this overall offense. Troy Franklin was the number 3 receiver. Obviously, Cortland Sutton maintains as the number 1, but considering VELE within this offense in the last 2 games that he has played, week 1 and week 6, 6 targets and 8 targets, 14 targets in 2 games, presents a lot of value that going forward, if in fact he continues to be one of Bo Nix's favorite targets within this offense, you would anticipate that, of course, he could be a value for fantasy purposes, quite literally rostered in 0% of leagues, because I didn't even expect him to play within this week, even though there was an absence of Josh Reynolds. I would have thought that we would have seen more of, Humphreys and or potentially Mims within the offense, but VELE ended up taking that position. Then we move on to number 12, Gabe Davis. We talked about it during the live stream yesterday when Gabe Davis scored on multiple occasions. I said, Gabe Davis is an afterthought within this offense because yesterday was the first game the entire year that he had more than 3 receptions in a singular game. He scored twice, and hopefully that is not going to be a common thing for many of us, mainly because, again, we want those touchdowns to go in the direction of Brian Thomas Jr., Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, potentially the running backs, whoever it ends up being. But as of right now, if Gabe Davis continues to find himself momentum, he's someone that maybe we can't ignore going into the future, but we'll have to wait and see whether or not that is going to be the case. All right, let's move on to the running back conversation. I want to first and foremost begin by talking about running backs that if in fact they are not already rostered, PSA, make sure they're rostered. We've talked about these players in weeks past. Of course, Tank Bigsby was the number 1 running back of last week. TRACY has been in the waiver wire episode for 2 running weeks. Tank Bigsby first and foremost, okay? Again, he has value primarily because of the injuries that Travis Etienne has sustained. The shoulder injuries and now most recently the hamstring injury. If in fact Travis Etienne is going to miss time, especially going into this week's matchup against the New England Patriots in London, again, do not forget it's going to begin at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time will be our Sunday morning stream because the game starts at 6:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Either way, the Patriots matchup is a top 10 matchup at the running back position based on rushing yards and rushing touchdowns allowed thus far this season. There's going to be far less D'Ernest Johnston because of the game script. This will be a Tank Bigsby legacy game or potential breakout game within the week that could end up getting himself in that top tier conversation, but it's a PSA mainly because he's already rostered in 63% of Yahoo leagues. TRACY, I do believe that he has earned the possibility to overthrow Devin Singletary within this offense, and Devin Singletary is still dealing with a groin injury for the last 2 consecutive games. Then we have the final option, Alexander Mattison, due to the overall injury to Zamir White, and of course the distrust that the organization and coaching staff has with Zamir White with the overall fumble issues that he has had thus far this season. The negative game script that this offense is going to be in going forward is only going to continue to implicate Alexander Mattison as a far more mainstay option within the offense. So again, if they aren't already rostered, be sure to have them on roster. Otherwise, let's move on to our top 6 running backs, beginning with our number 1, Isaac Guerendo. So here's the fact of the matter. Jordan Mason is dealing with an AC joint shoulder, injury that is going to potentially sideline him going into this upcoming week. Obviously, we're going to have to keep that monitored. But for those of you who have Jordan Mason and have a possibility of picking up Isaac, I mean, again, he's only rostered in 4% of leagues. That number isn't enough for us to ignore the overall idea of picking up this player for a 1-week play. Now, am I using my top tier overall waiver priority on this player? Absolutely not. I'd rather use it on one of those wide receivers that I talked about earlier, if I'm going to even use it in this circumstance. But Isaac Guerendo, again, coming off of a week in which he was able to, accomplish himself a huge rushing attempt, should have scored a touchdown late in that game, obviously slowed down to try to kill the clock. Either way, if you are implicated to be the starting running back of the San Francisco 49ers, we have seen that regardless of who that is, Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, Elijah Mitchell, or Isaac Guerendo, regardless of who that is, even, Kyle Juszczyk could probably find himself a lot of success as the starting running back of this team. There's going to be a lot of success to be had. They take on the Chiefs, which is a difficult matchup, but nonetheless, a player that we should be picking up just in case Jordan Mason is going to miss. Then we move on to Tyler Allgeier. The fact that he is still only rostered in 30% of leagues is shocking because, again, he is not only just a handcuff, but also is getting himself individualized opportunity within this backfield. Against the best matchup this last week against the Carolina Panthers, had himself, 18 carries for 105 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. An incredible overall performance going into the week. Now, going forward, that continues to imply that he is going to get himself more and more integration within this offense. Obviously, he's still going to be the RB2. It was only after the fact that we saw Bijan Robinson score his 2 touchdowns in that first half that Tyler Allgeier got himself a lot of workload as they were trying to kill the clock in the second half. So overall, still another one of these options that can be played as a starter within your overall league, depending on your running back depth, but in good matchups. Moving on to our number 3, Ty Chandler. If Aaron Jones is going to continue to miss time, again, the last time we saw Aaron Jones in London back in week 5 dealt with a hip injury. If that hip injury is going to pop up on the injury report at the beginning of this week, Ty Chandler could be implicated to potentially start this week and for the upcoming weeks. Now, I don't like this week's matchup against the Detroit Lions, but in some circumstances, you could find yourself value out of Ty Chandler within the receiving game, which certainly can go ahead and elevate him as a potential starting option. Only rostered in 27% of leagues. KIMANI VIDAL. So here's the fact of the matter. He is, in my opinion, a handcuff. Now, did he end up scoring a receiving touchdown? Absolutely. Is that going to imply that he may get more utilization going forward? There's a potential for it. With Gus Edwards being placed on the injured reserve, we still believe that based on the overall opportunity share that J.K. Dobbins was given, that he is going to still be the pole position starter. But this rookie running back is going to continue to get himself opportunity. As of right now, only rostered in 11% of leagues. He does present another potential option that could get into the mix of more opportunities, more touches, but very similar to a Ty Chandler, potentially even a Tyler Allgeier, potential other running backs within their offenses that are still the number 2, may get themselves 6 or 7 touches within a given game, but not enough to be like an automatic start every week unless it's an incredibly advantageous matchup, which this upcoming week, taking on the Arizona Cardinals, it could end up being a blowout in that extent, especially considering Arizona really hasn't played well thus far this season against good teams. Moving on to our number 5, we have Jeremy McNichols. If in fact we're going to see another week in which Brian Robinson Jr. is going to miss, understand that they take on the Panthers this week. So if Brian Robinson misses and it's going to be the combination of Austin Eckler and Jeremy McNichols, I would anticipate, based on how well Washington has played and how poorly the run-stop defense for the Panthers has played thus far this season, Jeremy McNichols could come away with not only a touchdown, but a lot of yardage and certainly be a top 30 running back option as a 1-week starter. Moving on to Sean Tucker. Speaking of a 1-week starter that had themselves an incredible performance, Sean Tucker quite literally finished as the number 1 overall running back in fantasy this week. Mainly because, again, Rachaad White was out, Bucky Irving got his, all of his statistics, and then late in the game, Sean Tucker took over in garbage time as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers roared to scoring 50-plus points within the overall matchup. Of course, Sean Tucker over 130 rushing yards, ridiculous numbers across the board. If he gets himself more opportunities within this backfield in the absence of Rachaad White, assuming Rachaad White misses more time, certainly could be a value potentially for a 1-week play or even more. All right, let's move on to the next position. Let's talk about our tight ends. These are the 3 tight ends that I wanted to first and foremost mention that if in fact they aren't already rostered, please do yourself a favor and have them rostered. Again, these are players that you can start every single week, and we have suggested that you do so every single week based on their overall opportunity share and production. Cade Otton from weeks 3 through 6, averaging 7.2 fantasy points per game on 6.8 targets per game. The next 3 games takes on Baltimore, Atlanta, and Kansas City. Those are all top-tier, top 12 matchups at the tight end position based on fantasy points allowed. Then we move on to Tyler Conklin. From weeks 3 through 5, again, this video is being recorded before tonight's game against the Buffalo Bills. He's been able to average 7.7 targets per game and 8.0 fantasy points per game. Again, with a new offensive coordinator, does that elevate his overall production? Does that elevate the offense? Thus far this season, the Jets are a bottom 3rd team within offensive scoring. If in fact it elevates it, maybe there's more touchdown upside for Tyler Conklin going forward. Then we move on to Zach Ertz, our number 3. As of right now, thus far this season, weeks 1 through 6, averaging 4.83 targets per game and 5.88 fantasy points per game. A better option in a full PPR fantasy format, but this upcoming week takes on the Carolina Panthers, which is certainly an advantageous matchup. All right, but outside of those players, let's talk about some other tight ends that may be more widely available, because the three that I just mentioned are all rostered in like 30% of leagues plus on Yahoo. So as for Hunter Henry, again, with Drake May providing more value to this offense going forward, this gives a lot of opportunity for Hunter Henry to be far more valuable and potentially consistent for our overall teams. Now, in the 2 games thus far this season that Hunter Henry was given ample opportunity, again, we're talking about the game in which he was given 12 targets earlier this year, leading to 14.9 fantasy points. And then just most recently, with Drake May, 5 targets leading to 11.6 fantasy points. The rest of the games this season, 4 or less targets, leading to 2.8, 1.9, 2.2, and 4.2 fantasy points. If opportunity is going to be there, with Drake May airing it out to one of his veteran options, Hunter Henry, who quite literally doesn't leave the field, this could lead to him being a far more viable option going forward. Now, this upcoming week, they take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, Cole Kmet just went for 570 and 2 receiving touchdowns. Most recently, Indianapolis Colts tight ends combined for 4 catches, 49 and a touchdown. And Buffalo Bills tight ends, 4 catches, 48 and a touchdown. Hunter Henry can be implicated to be a top 16 option within the position this week. Moving on to Colby Parkinson. Again, Colby Parkinson, in the absence of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, can certainly be of value. And if, in fact, we don't see the return of either of those 2 players within the next 2 weeks, Colby Parkinson, who most recently in week 5 prior to the bye week, taking on Green Bay, went for 7 receptions on 13 targets and 52 receiving yards. If, in fact, he was dropped in your league because of the bye week, only rostered in 16% of leagues right now. If Cooper Kupp does not return, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders, an advantageous enough matchup to be of value. Then we move on to the final option. We have JOHNU Smith here. Actually, he's not our final option, but an option as our number 3A. JOHNU Smith, the last time we saw him out prior to the bye week, week 5, 8 targets, 5 receptions, and 62 receiving yards. Pretty good overall opportunity share. Now, if in fact we're going to have Tyler Huntley for another consecutive week, there should be some opportunities continuing to go in the direction of JOHNU Smith, as he is one of the favorite targets of Tyler Huntley. Now, this upcoming week, they take on the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are a great matchup for the tight end position. We saw Cole Kmet, 10 catches for 97 and a touchdown. Pittsburgh tight ends, 7 catches, 88 and a touchdown. Jacksonville tight ends, 7 catches, 43 and a touchdown. This is an advantageous matchup. And if, in fact, JOHNU Smith is implicated for a high volume of overall targets and opportunity, because, obviously Tyler Huntley cannot distribute it to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, could be an option, only rostered in 5% of leagues. Then we move on to Ja'Tavion Sanders, the rookie tight end for, of course, the Carolina Panthers. The fact of the matter is, in the last 2 games in which he has played, he has gotten himself over 73% of the offensive snaps. Not only that, has been able to see himself 5 targets against Chicago in week 5, and most recently, 7 targets against the Atlanta Falcons for 5 receptions and 49 receiving yards. If he's going to continue to get himself opportunity, only rostered in 1% of leagues. We talked about it yesterday. Only one person asked about him yesterday within our overall, live stream, the 4 hours that we talked yesterday. Only one person asked about him. I said, let's go ahead, let's fire him up. He had himself a solid overall week in full PPR, 9.9 fantasy points. We will take that every single week if that can be delivered on a consistent basis. All right, let's move on to the quarterback conversation. If in fact these 3 quarterbacks aren't already rostered, do yourself a favor and roster them. Again, Sam Darnold already rostered in 56. Same thing with Fields, 56% of leagues. Justin Herbert, 41%. Sam Darnold thus far this season, 11 passing touchdowns in 5 games. His upcoming schedule: Detroit, Rams, Colts, and Jaguars. 4 very easy games in terms of their overall passing slate, and you get the potential return of TJ Hawkinson sooner rather than later. Then you move on to Justin Fields. Has been able to score over 18 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. Has scored for 5 rushing touchdowns in those last games. And not only that, is averaging 11.2 fantasy points per game just off of rushing statistics in the last 4 games that he has participated in. As long as those opportunities continue to be consistent, he is of value. Then we move on to Justin Herbert, who again is taking on the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals have allowed 2 or more touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks in 4 of the last 6 games. Justin Herbert could be a solid option within the overall matchup against that defense. But if in fact they aren't available, let's move on to Matthew Stafford, coming off of the bye week, and in the upcoming weeks has himself pretty advantageous matchups. The upcoming weeks versus Las Vegas, Minnesota, and Seattle. Again, 3 secondaries that have not played well and have allowed a lot of passing statistics to opposing quarterbacks. But if in fact we're going to be still without Kupp and Nacua this week, understand that In the last 3 games, without Kupp and Nakua, Stafford has been able to get himself over 220 passing yards every single one of those games. And going against Las Vegas of all secondaries is still going to be an advantageous enough matchup to where he could start for you within the given week. Then we move on to Daniel Jones, who thus far this season, his home versus away splits make me a little bit afraid to potentially suggest him here. Thus far this season, 0 passing touchdowns at home, 6 touchdowns on the road, 2 per game. He plays at home against the Eagles this week. It's an advantageous matchup based on the fact that that secondary has not played well. Obviously, Deshaun Watson couldn't take advantage of it because Deshaun Watson is just not a great quarterback. But the rest of the league has dominated against that secondary, and every quarterback has played relatively well, and every offense has played well against that defense. So Daniel Jones, hopefully with Malik Neighbors returning, could elevate his overall game because there's more playmakers on the field to help him deliver fantasy points. Then we move on to the final option, Andy Dalton. I mean, the fact of the matter is, 3 of the last 4 games, over 15 fantasy points. As long as that is the case, taking on the Washington Commanders in a negative game script could be of value for us, especially for those of us who do not have Dak Prescott or Caleb Williams, who are currently on bye going into this week. All right, let's move on to the final stage of our overall waiver wire suggestions. Let's talk about kickers. Will Reichard has probably been dropped in many leagues, mainly because, again, they were on bye week, only 3% rostered. Over the course of the last 4 weeks, 11, 12, 7, and 16 fantasy points. They take on the Lions. It's an indoor stadium. Should be an exciting matchup, hopefully high scoring between these two teams. Matthew Wright obviously dealt with a shoulder injury because he tried to make a tackle for some reason. Kickers got to stop making tackles, please, especially for the 49ers. They take on the Chiefs this week. Last week, he scored 13 fantasy points. Taking on the Chiefs this week, he may be asked to do even more within the kicking game. We move on to Matt Gay, who over the course of the last 3 weeks has put up 9, 10, and 8 fantasy points, with Anthony Richardson most likely to return this upcoming week, taking on the Dolphins. It could lead to a lot more potential field goals within the overall matchup. Then we talk about defenses. Of course, we have the Los Angeles Chargers, who again take on the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals have not played well against good teams. And thus far this season, the Chargers have presented that they are a solid team and could certainly give them a lot of troubles. The Chargers defense, amongst the 3 that I'm mentioning today, have the highest rostership percentage, primarily because, again, they played against Denver this last week. So that definitely does make it a little bit tricky. But nonetheless, we move on to the Cincinnati Bengals, who take on Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns. Again, anybody who's taken on that defense has found themselves in abundance of success. The last 5 defenses that have played against Deshaun Watson in fantasy have all scored over 9 fantasy points, including the Philadelphia Eagles, who had double-digit points this last week against that, overall offense. Then we move on to the Los Angeles Rams, who take on Aiden O'Connell and, of course, the Las Vegas Raiders. If that offense cannot find themselves any semblance of success, the Los Angeles Rams defense still a solid option within the overall conversation. Okay, that's going to cover it in regards to my waiver wire pickups going into Week 7. Let's go ahead and close out today's episode by putting together a pick'em entry via Underdog. Again, if you guys haven't checked them out already, check out the link down in the description in order to sign up today using code Andrew to get my ranking, get the first-time deposit offer, and, of course, be able to take advantage of potential picks going into tonight's game. Now, what I mean is taking advantage of like the new customer special free pick of Josh Allen, 0.5 total yards. You can go ahead and, if in fact you're a new customer, you just sign up today, you can take advantage of this and implicate it within your overall entry and potentially have an even greater overall win within the overall week. So let's go ahead and let's talk about my favorite plays going into tonight. All right, so we've gone ahead and we've traveled on over to Underdog. So at this current moment in time, you guys know that over the course of the last couple weeks, my favorite plays have typically been first quarter implicated plays. But I want to go ahead and mention first and foremost, if we get more clarity regarding Khalil Shakir and he ends up playing today, I'm going to take higher on his first quarter receiving yards. But until they give us more clarity as to whether or not he is going to play, obviously they don't really know. So we're just going to wait on that. Keep that in mind. Outside of that overall, the other plays that I honestly do like, again, are first quarter plays. I'm always looking for first quarter receiving yards, which between these two options, I will take higher. Now, again, I prefer to put Garrett Wilson alongside of the overall potential of Khalil Shakir if he ends up as a number. But these are two numbers that I overall like going into the first quarter of the game. Now, we did hear a lot that there's going to be a more run-heavy approach from Todd Downing, the new offensive coordinator of the New York Jets. And of course, when you get a new interim head coach, and he's a defensive-minded head coach at that, the former defensive coordinator of this team now elevated to being the head coach, there may be a more kind of committed role to running the ball. So I also do like the overall potential of Breece Hall surpassing 13.5 rushing attempts. Now, if Braylon Allen is going to get himself a lot of utilization, there may be a potential in which he could dig into that overall workload. So this may be a number in which we're taking the higher on rushing yards. But if it's me, I'm probably leaning in the direction of this 13.5 within a different slip altogether. Otherwise, I'm trying to go after first quarter receiving yards, get the slip done by the end of the first quarter, be happy with it, and keep it moving. But ultimately, yeah, I think the idea of like these three, these are solid plays. Honestly, I'm just going to put this, it's a 6X. Yeah, I'll put this together. Let's see here. We'll do that. So that'll be this entry. I'll probably put together some other entries, but like 25 to win 157.50. Pretty much it's going to be dictated at the end of the first quarter. I'll either have it won or have it lost, and so be it. We'll keep it moving. But these are some of the better plays. Again, I'm always looking for first quarter receiving yards. Obviously, those are the only two players implicated. Once we get Khalil Shakir on the list, Khalil Shakir and, of course, Garrett Wilson would be the preferred in those overall categories going into tonight. All right, that's going to cover it for today's video. Again, thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with my top 40 running back rankings. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back also later tonight after tonight's game via live stream. So for those of you who are interested in asking questions, be sure to swing on by. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.